I should probably start by setting the stage for the kind of place we live in. It's a rural neighborhood, tucked away in a kind of small town that's easy to miss unless you're actually looking for it. We don't get a lot of visitors, and the locals, well, they've lived here for generations. There's a certain way of life around here, tight-knit, insular, and full of long-standing rivalries and old grudges. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, whether you want them to or not. For the longest time, my family and I were outsiders. We were the ones who moved into the house no one thought anyone would ever want. It was cheap, run down, and in need of a lot of work. The previous owners had let it fall into disrepair, and the house had a reputation for being the eyesore of the neighborhood. Most people avoided us at first, assuming we were just another family who'd come to fail or move away within a few years. You see, when you're the new people in a place like this, you're immediately under scrutiny. No matter how hard you try to fit in, you always feel like you're being watched. But there was one person in particular who had more of a reason to keep an eye on us than anyone else. Anne. Anne, as I'll refer to her here, was the queen of the neighborhood in her own way. She owned a small convenience store just down the road, a little place that everyone relied on for the basics. It wasn't much, but it was the kind of store that had its loyal customers, mostly the locals. The kind of place where you could grab a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, and maybe a bag of chips on your way home. But beyond being a business owner, Anne was known for being a very, very particular woman. She had a reputation for being tough, and she didn't take kindly to anyone who crossed her. And let me tell you, crossing Anne was easy. She found an excuse for a grudge about practically everything. It didn't take long before my family became the target of her disdain. To be fair, it wasn't entirely her fault. When we first moved in, we didn't realize just how complex the dynamics were in the neighborhood. I had heard whispers about and the history between her and the previous owners of our property, but I didn't think much of it. Small towns, right? Everyone has a history. What we didn't realize, however, was that Anne's vendettas went deep, and she wasn't one to let go of past grievances. The first real conflict between us and started when we made some changes to our property. You see, the house we bought came with a huge piece of land, but it was poorly maintained. Overgrown trees, fallen fences, and a dilapidated barn. It was a mess. We started clearing things out, cutting down a few trees, and fixing up the property little by little. We didn't think anything of it, but it didn't take long for Anne to notice. And when she did, she didn't hold back. She stormed over to our house one afternoon, all high and mighty, to demand that we stop cutting down trees on our own land. "Those trees were part of my view," she yelled, as if we were violating some sacred local code. At the time, we didn't know how to handle it. My partner and I tried to reason with her. "It's our land," we explained. "We're just clearing it out so we can make it livable." But Anne wouldn't listen. She ranted about how the previous owners had never had any issues with her, how we were disrupting the neighborhood, and how we were ruining the aesthetic of the area. As if the mess we inherited wasn't already enough of an eyesore. But that was just the beginning. Before we knew it, rumors started spreading. It didn't take long for Anne to paint us as the new villains in the neighborhood. She had her ways of talking to people, planting seeds of doubt about us, about the type of people we were, the kind of things we did. And like clockwork, people started avoiding us. At first, it wasn't much, just some passive stares when we walked down the street or whispers behind closed doors. But as time passed, the rumors began to grow. Anne was the local store owner, after all, and when people trusted her, they believed what she said. We didn't stand a chance. We soon found ourselves the target of everyone's gossip, and it was frustrating. There was no real reason for the bad blood. We hadn't done anything wrong. We had just moved in and tried to fix up a house that had been left to rot. But in a small town like this, it didn't matter. Once a rumor takes root, it spreads like wildfire, and you're stuck with the consequences. Then, things took an even darker turn. Anne's son, who had spent some time in prison for reasons we didn't fully know or care about, came back to live with her. And that was when things really started to spiral, and allowed him to move in above her store. They were a package deal, and we knew we'd have to deal with him if we ever needed anything from the store. But we tried to keep our distance, hoping that time would heal the growing tension. We didn't know how much worse things would get, and had made it clear to her son that he was forbidden from hosting any wild parties, which, as you can imagine, wasn't a difficult rule to follow, since there was really no one to party with. His only job was to help run the store when she and her husband were busy with other things. Not exactly a glamorous gig, but for someone just out of prison, I suppose it was a step in the right direction. However, there was a problem. As much as he pretended to be straight and narrow, Anne's son had learned little from his past. We started noticing discrepancies in the store's register. More specifically, We noticed that S had been double charging customers for certain items. It was subtle at first, just a couple of cents here and there, but over time, it became more obvious. We realized that he was pocketing the extra money. We thought about confronting him directly, but we knew how and would react. So, instead, we quietly reported it to her, trying to do the right thing. We expected a thank you, or at least an acknowledgement of the issue. Instead, and dismissed us outright. "You're imagining things," she said, as if she couldn't be bothered to entertain our concerns. And that, to me, felt like the final straw. We weren't even asking for a refund at that point. We just wanted to make sure the store wasn't involved in something shady. But no, she didn't care. Her son was above reproach in her eyes. That's when we started sharing our experience with others in the neighborhood. Slowly, people started catching on, noticing patterns in their own receipts when they shopped there. The word spread, and soon, even those who had once avoided us began to whisper among themselves. It was clear that people were starting to question things. And that's when the peacekeeper entered the picture. Mr. Peacekeeper, as we came to call him, was the local guy who tried to keep things calm between neighbors. He wasn't officially a mediator or anything like that, but everyone respected him. He was a quiet, steady presence in the neighborhood who made it his job to keep the peace. He'd stop by every so often, check in with everyone, make sure things were smooth. Everyone appreciated it, even if it felt a little strange having someone constantly poke around your business. Mr. Peacekeeper pulled up to our house one day, and I'll admit, I was nervous. The rumors about us were still fresh in people's minds, and the last thing I wanted was for him to be caught up in the mess. But instead of immediately confronting us, he was surprisingly friendly. He asked how we were doing, what had been going on in the neighborhood, and generally checked in. After some small talk, he brought up the rumors. He told us that Anne had already spoken to him about the situation, and according to her, everything was a misunderstanding. Just a few glitches in the register, he said, clearly taking Anne's side. He insisted that we drop it, telling us that it was causing unnecessary drama. He warned that if we kept pushing, it could cause more trouble than it was worth. We were in a tough spot. We didn't want to escalate things, but at the same time, we felt like we couldn't just let it slide. We knew what was going on, and the idea that Anne and her son could get away with it frustrated us. But we didn't have much choice. So we agreed to keep quiet. At the time, we had no idea how much bigger the situation was going to get. When Mr. Peacekeeper left that day, his words stuck with us. He had tried to soften the situation, to suggest that we drop it and let the rumors die down. But something about the way he'd said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the suggestion to stay quiet, it was the way he framed it, as if we were the ones causing the problems. It was as if he was telling us that things were already out of our control, and that, no matter how much we tried to fight back, we wouldn't win. That sense of helplessness hung over us for weeks. For the first time since moving in, I began to wonder whether we had made a mistake. This neighborhood wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a network of people bound together by years of unspoken history. And no matter how hard we tried to fit in, we were still outsiders. That's what Mr. Peacekeeper's visit made me realize. No matter how much we worked to fix up our house or how many efforts we made to be friendly, we would never be accepted. We'd always be seen as the invaders, the ones who didn't understand the subtle rules of the place. The ones who dared to challenge the status quo. And when it came to Anne, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just unknowingly walked into a trap. Her son's little side business, skimming extra change from customers, had never been about the money. It was about control. And she, as the store's matriarch, wasn't about to let anyone undermine her family's position in the town. It's funny how something so seemingly small can grow into a larger conflict. The initial frustration over the store's register was just the first pebble in a much larger avalanche. Once we reported the issue to and were brushed off, I began to hear more disturbing things about her. Through hushed conversations with a few of the more sympathetic neighbors, I learned that Anne's power in the town ran deeper than I had imagined. She had her fingers in just about everything. From the local school's PTA to the county fair, Anne was everywhere. The community bank? She had a stake in it. The regional council? She had influence there too. It was as if she had woven a web around this little town, and she was the spider at the center of it all. Her ability to manipulate people was uncanny. She had a way of convincing everyone that her way was the only way. And if you crossed her, even in the slightest, you were cut off. It was subtle but effective. She never overtly attacked anyone. Instead, she made you feel like an outsider. She spread enough doubt and suspicion that no one dared to question her or her family. To them, she was more than a business owner. She was the lifeblood of the community. If you didn't respect her, you didn't belong. I remember one particular conversation I had with Rebecca, a woman who lived 2 houses down from us. She had lived here longer than anyone, and her opinion carried weight. The conversation started innocuously enough. She had come over one afternoon to help us with some gardening, or at least to offer unsolicited advice. But as we spoke, she began to let something slip. "And is a force around here, you know," Rebecca said, as she leaned on her shovel, watching me struggle with a stubborn weed. "People forget that she's the reason this town even still exists. Her father started the store back in the 40s, and she's been running it ever since." I paused. I had heard bits and pieces about Anne's family history, but never anything this personal. "What do you mean?" Rebecca glanced around, making sure no one else was within earshot. "Well, it's not just the store. She's got other investments, businesses on the side. People don't talk about it much, but Anne's got her hand in a lot of pies. And it's not just her. Her son's in the mix now, too. That boy's trouble. But he's got Anne's protection. And that's why no one dares to call him out." I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The more I learned about Anne, the more I realized just how much power she held. It wasn't just about being the store owner anymore. It was about her controlling the narrative of this town, shaping it the way she wanted. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that Anne wasn't the only one with a stake in this game. Her son, might have been the loose cannon, but he was a product of his mother's influence. And that meant that even when he stepped out of line, he was shielded by the very power that kept the town's gears turning. The trouble with wasn't just that he was a former convict or that he skimmed money from the store. It was that he was constantly testing the boundaries, pushing the limits of what was acceptable. And she always had his back. The tipping point came one night when my partner, Ben, and I were walking home from the store. It was late, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional passing car. As we approached our house, we noticed a group of teenagers hanging around in front of Anne's store. It wasn't unusual. The teenagers often gathered there, smoking and talking trash. But tonight, something felt different. They were speaking in hushed tones, looking around nervously. We couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. "They'll never notice," one of the boys whispered. "It's a small town. Who's gonna care? They all trust her." Another voice responded. "What if they do? I'm not going down for something I didn't do." As said to keep quiet. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the store's register. This wasn't about a few stolen bucks here and there. This was about something bigger, something darker. Was involved in something much more significant, something that had the potential to ruin more than just our reputation. These kids weren't talking about simple theft. They were talking about a cover-up, a conspiracy. They were involved in something that stretched beyond the walls of Anne's store, something that could implicate not only but also his mother. I didn't want to believe it at first. It seemed so far-fetched. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Anne's influence, S's erratic behavior, the way the whole town seemed to turn a blind eye whenever something shady happened, it all pointed to something much bigger than I had ever realized. The next morning, I found myself standing at the front window of our house, staring out at the quiet street. The neighborhood felt different now. The sense of unease was palpable. I could see it in the way people walked by, heads down, eyes darting around. No one was talking to each other, not even in the usual friendly way. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Anne was behind it all. And that's when things began to escalate. It wasn't long before the inevitable confrontation occurred. We had been avoiding Anne for a while, but the pressure was mounting. I don't know if it was the tension in the air or something else, but I could feel it building. One afternoon, as I was walking down to the mailbox, I noticed Anne standing on the porch of her store, watching me. She had that look in her eyes, the one that told me she had been waiting for me. She knew I had been talking to people, and she knew it was only a matter of time before I came to her with questions. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral as I walked past. "Don't you think it's about time we had a little chat?" Anne replied, her voice smooth but with an edge to it. "I've heard some things that don't sit well with me." I stopped. My heart was pounding in my chest. There was no getting around it now. We were going to have this conversation, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen afterward. "Look," I said, trying to keep my composure. "We didn't mean to cause any trouble, but there are things going on here that people aren't talking about. Things that aren't right." Anne's expression shifted, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe? It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by her usual calculated calm. "You think you know what's going on?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You're out of your depth, and I suggest you stay that way. People like you don't last around here if you start poking into things that don't concern you." It was a threat, and that, in a strange way, gave me the resolve to press on. But before I could say anything, She turned on her heel and walked back into the store, leaving me standing there, more uncertain than ever. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.